Very much appreciated.
Yes, thank you.
No problem, a pleasure. And Catherine, something I said is, whilst I've got some experience in it, I'm by no means the expert, actually. Let me just stop
but that probably applies to all of us. We'll have done it maybe once or twice. It's not something we do all the time, so
I don't know why it's not.
Don't make apologies.
I don't know why it's not. It's deep. Let me just try sharing again. It's okay, cool. So I'll just pop it into. I won't pop it. I might pop it into presentation mode a bit later on, but I'll lose all of you. There's some builds on these. So these are slides actually that were just recently shared with the board, not by me, I have to add, but because they were already in existence, I thought they'd actually provide us a focus for the conversation. Now, Rich, I'm going to need to rely on you to tell if anyone's putting hands up. But what I would ask, because I'm not the expert, is if anyone's got any comments or wants to add anything, please carry on in the conversation. In terms of, I don't need to tell you, but I'm just doing it for fullness, really. Everyone knows the Balanced Scorecard, Kaplan and Norton, and there is a really good, albeit obviously the original paper, I think it's Harvard Business Review back in 1992, which gives you the background. I know lots of work's been done since then, and as people have used it and critiqued it and so on. But it fundamentally still remains just looking at the company from 4 different perspectives, and it's taken away from what can be the typical one of the financial perspective and just saying, actually, all we're here for is to achieve results. So you've got that, the view being that it's much more sustainable. And the way I like thinking about it is, obviously you've got the vision and strategy in the middle, and I'll talk a little bit about that and a strategy map and the importance of a strategy map in building the balanced scorecard is step 1. But it's how I tend to think that you've got examples there of the 4 different I guess elements of the balanced scorecard, but I kind of ask that question for financial is, how do shareholders see it, or how do stakeholders see it if you're not entirely a shareholder organisation? So you can have the measures in there with the examples up there. And then from the customer point of view, it's very simply, how do customers see us, and how do we measure that is obviously the bits that we've got in the little boxes. It's either learning and growth or internal processes or organisational processes. Sometimes people call that organisational capability. My doorbell has just gone and I am the person here. So I'll just finish this and I'll go and answer the door. Just this slide. So from the organisational perspective, it's, in order to achieve all this, what do we need to be really good at internally? What processes do we need to be really good at? And then the learning and growth bit is, and how do we, what culture do we need? What do we need our people to, and our human resource to enact? Like Richard, can I just step away for a sec?
Yeah, no problem. Go for it. Is that what people have broadly been using themselves? Yeah. Okay.
I think as well. I've done various iterations of this, dependent on the organisation. So some that I've seen are strategic, and operational, and then the organisational bit.
Okay.
So actually, more of a focus on three factors, not 4. But you can cut and paste into these. I mean, the 4 are fundamentally the same, but it's just how you describe them and what's pertinent to your business. So I think the point is it can be adaptable.
Yes, yeah, got you. How do people use it, do you find? I mean, do they engage with it and continually use it, as opposed to it perhaps focusing minds at a particular corporate moment, should we say, and then perhaps being put in drawers, or is that too cynical?
I think probably the place where I saw it used to its best advantage was possibly in the larger organisations I've worked for. So Pret very much work on a sort of performance-led basis, and every shop has its measures and place on the league table, scorecards, etc. So I think there it was done very well, and DHL as well actually were.
Okay.
I found it where there's been the larger teams with more capability and ability to sort of interpret it all, etc. They do focus on it a lot more.
Oh, that's interesting. Thanks, Jim. I might have to come back to that in terms of Catherine's questions about rollout. It obviously caught fire. Rebecca, sorry, back to you. All okay, I hope.
Yeah, it was the window cleaner, which meant I had to run around and open the gate. The dogs are barking. All good. I thought I had this sort of disturbance before, because normally the house is full of people. I'm going to just jump forward a little bit. in terms of, hold on a second, bear with me, it's not moving on to the next slide. Yeah, this is probably a repeat of it, and I recognise we're very short on time. I'm happy to share the slides, Richard, afterwards anyway.
Thank you.
I think this is quite a good slide, actually, because it you know, when you are going into doing this, it's just some of the traps, actually, and this is from that critique and that learning that's come back, and I'll just skip through them quickly. But one of the things is called senior level engagement, and it's like anything we talk. I think I missed you, but I think you're talking about rollout. And you know, if people don't believe in the measures, then they're not going to believe in what you're trying to do. So that's one bit, and I've got a little stepped process that we're redoing our balanced scorecard. So that's sort of where we are, which is why it was sort of front of mind. And one of the slide 6 there, it gives you those steps, which again you can follow. I don't want to take over all the speaking time. And the other thing is just believing it's a measurement framework, and particularly when you look at, you know, because we are talking about KPIs, so a lot of examples, so key performance measures, key results measures. But I think one of the authors went on to write a book about driving, just looking in the rearview mirror, and those people who've worked with the balanced scorecard before will know that just looking at backward measures, which is the finances typically, doesn't give you a picture necessarily of where you're going, which is where the value of the whole balance bit comes in, and that's the principles behind really their model. I think also the sort of the importance of when you get to the balanced scorecard and the measures, and I have got an example in a later slide, you know, it is the important bit is about you step back before you get to those measures. It's actually quite easy, and a lot of organisations like us have lots and lots of different measures. Are they really the most pertinent ones that would form, you know, if you don't measure anything else, what do you measure in order to achieve your objective? Or are they just because they're easy to measure? And that's a question, actually, when those people are in the process of developing them. Sometimes the things you really want to measure are really hard to measure. And I don't know that should necessarily deter you from having it on your balanced scorecard, but it quite often influences what ends up on a balanced scorecard. So it's just a thing to have in the back of your mind. And it's that question of, and it starts with the strategy, you know, what are we trying to do? And how do we want to achieve that? And what do we need to be good at internally to do it, and so on. And it has to reflect the strategy. The strategy map, I mentioned a bit, I've got some examples, and this is the starting point, really. I think people can jump in with the measures, and that's not necessarily where you need to be. So you have to look at what are we trying to do, and then this is really the end point of that. I've used Recap now, I should take that out. But the danger and the temptation is to copy someone else's scorecard. And I think if you're sort of diving in halfway through and you're looking at people's measures, that can be quite tempting. I think if you start with actually what is our strategy and have that blank piece of paper almost in terms of how do we achieve that, then you won't be in danger of doing that. But it's really useful to look at what other companies do, because there will be some relevant measures in there. Just skipping through these, actually develop, what's easy to measure, but mentioned that bit. Now this bit about communicate and collect the information regularly, the reason I'm so positive about it is because when we were running it actively, and we just had a bit of a gap, and we're sort of redoing it now, we had all of our senior leaders and managers, anyone who managed people basically, a percentage of their annual bonus linked to company results. But company results aren't just financials. Company results are the measures of the whole of the balanced scorecard, and for the more senior managers it's 25% of their bonus. For the less senior managers it was 10%, and we held that back until the end of the year, that element of it. But what we did as part of our monthly updates on results was we shared the balanced scorecard, and I'll show you the example that we had of that. And it was kind of something that everyone knew about, everyone talked about, they knew exactly how the company was performing. We chose we measured profit, but we didn't actually put it in those numbers just because of the sensitivity, and our balanced scorecard was going out across the whole company. Everyone could access that information. So that's the other thing. If you're in a comms thing, if there's stuff that you really don't want to get to competitors, then obviously you need to be careful how you actually demonstrate that. And we did it on a red, amber, green status with numbers in, and I'll share that with you. And the other bit is just because you've got it, and particularly I think you're talking about a startup, Catherine, I think you'll need to keep reviewing if it is the right measures, if it is the right strategy behind it.
Yeah.
That's one thing. This bit I'll skip over because I know you want a lot of discussion, but this was just the steps that the lady who's leading on this is taking. So around speaking with the board directors individually, I think that's one point, because otherwise you can get, you know, the loudest voice says this is what we definitely need to measure, and then other people's real thinking is there. So give people that chance to think individually. I think there's a danger of having too many measures in there with speaking with people individually. So it's almost, you know, if you could measure just 3 things, what would they be? Would be maybe an approach to take. On this, and this is just an example of a discussion, say, with our service director, just some things about when you're having that individual discussion. These are just things that people can use. You know, what do you measure already? And here's some examples of what we measure already. How important are they? You know, and it's getting down to what really is crucial to us achieving our strategy. That means we need to be excellent, and therefore let's measure it, type thing. I might need to just go into slideshow quickly now, if I can do. Let me just move you, Richard. Just because some of these have now got builds on them. You can still see me, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we
So
can.
not going to move slides. So this is an old slide, as you can see. So you could say our strategy would become 10% return on sales company. And then it's a question of, you know, how do we do that? And this is creating the strategy map. I'm not going to be able to talk a load of detail through this, but it's looking at, you know, what do we need to achieve in the financials? What do we want our customers to think about us? What do we therefore need to be really good at? And what do we need from a people culture perspective in the organisational capability? You'll see on the bottom there, we added in our own little edit to the balanced scorecard, and this was around sustainability. And as you can see, it's been a long time. This wasn't, I don't think I should say FY12, but sustainability has been one of Rico's USPs. So we actually pulled it out because part of this was to communicate with all our teams about what was really important to Rico and what we were measuring. We actually had that sitting separately. Now, in reality, we could have either had it in internal processes, we could have had it in organisational capability, probably could have had it in customer as well. But actually, at the time, we chose to sit it separately out there because it was something that we'd started to measure in a lot of detail. This looks at what are your objectives under each of those in these blue boxes. I'll keep clicking to get us through, and therefore, what do we need to do it? So if you look at trying to think, so we want to achieve sales, so many million sales. How are we going to do that? In our case, we're saying actually we want to increase a certain type of sales. This is production print sales. In order to achieve this, we want to be, for customers, their partner of choice. You know, we want people to think when they're going to buy something, they come to Rico. And then it's kind of, well, in order to do all the things in this box, what do we need to do in this box? We need to understand our markets better. We need to understand customer processes better, because what we do is improve their processes. We need to increase the activity of salespeople and so on and so forth. And then obviously we need our salespeople to be motivated. So you can kind of see the thinking, but this is just in one area of the business. This is just a sales example of it. Let me move on. And then that translates into looking at, so there's our objectives, and then we look at measures and targets. And again, this is just examples. This isn't a live one, it's just an example. And so our measures and targets against that is what's our market share, how many units have we sold, so on and so forth. So it just gives you examples, increased activity, how many sales visits are people doing weekly. So quite simplistic in lots of ways, but it gives you the feel for how this is built up. And then they are translated into the key result areas, which are the ones in yellow. And then this is, oh, I need to move you, Richard, just quickly. So this is an example of an old balanced scorecard. But and this, well, I'll just talk you through it quickly. I've taken the numbers out. But this is what we would use to communicate with everyone. So we had, under each of the different areas, we had our objective to deliver our financial targets, to continue to be the leading brand, to be an employer of choice, to be recognised as a leader in CR and sustainability. So those are the visions in each area. And then we had the actual measures that we came down to. So if you're looking at people ones, I said employee engagement is really important to us. Gender diversity was a particular focus at the moment. We had an external benchmark, which was a business in the community gender diversity index. And voluntary attrition was quite important. In fact, in some ways it was quite important because sometimes it's not high enough. So we just wanted to make sure that we kind of had enough but not too much attrition. And then the reason we pulled out society was because we again had benchmarking as an index, which was corporate responsibility index, again through business and the community. Originally, when we developed the scorecard, we just had the darker black ones. So achieve growth in new business areas was one heading in its own right. What we then decided to do with the development of it actually is we split it into our different business lines so that we could see the different levels below that. And then for communication purposes, we allowed people to see last year. I left the ones in that were my measures, the target. So this was the key bit we set every year. What we actually got each month. I'll move you again, Richard. What we achieved each month, and we shared that, and what percentage of what we are hoping to get. So you can see this particular month it had gone up month sort of compared to our previous month, and it was green. Obviously it achieved 100% or more, and you can see we did a green, amber, we did a red. I haven't got any red ones on here, and we also put in here whether they were annual measures, and some of them were, and the others were all measured monthly. So those are all the slides. So I will stop presenting at the moment, but it's a very, very quick whistle-stop tour of where we went with it.
No, that's great. Thank you, Rebecca. Really good. And seeing that common thread, because of course since it was developed, and going back to 92, I'd forgotten it was that long ago. Mm-hmm. But of course in that time we've had purpose and vision becoming much more to the fore. So it's interesting to see the links that you've made back to those vision statements and presumably ultimately to purpose as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we are lucky, but we do have a lot with sort of really good global sort of purpose fulfillment through work. And so a lot of these things we had in here, we're ahead of the game a little bit in the UK, and now they still seem relevant, don't they, to a large extent, interestingly.
Yeah, definitely. And how easy has it been to measure? Because sometimes the risk in doing these things is that actually, you need a whole factory to produce the monitoring and pulling it all together, and then translating that into the financial elements for the individuals. How easy have you found it to be to administer?
Well, I think this is the thing around the points. It was fine on the measures we've got. They're all measurable. But obviously, if you get system changes, suddenly you can't measure. We've got a new HR system since this. So voluntary attrition is actually really hard to measure monthly at times. So it is a key point, actually. I think it's where the annual measures are quite nice and where you've got a benchmark and someone else doing it. Yeah. But I would say how it worked really well for us as a finance director, took responsibility for it. A lot of the more difficult measures are from the finance system anyway. And then you'd have key sort of stakeholders in each of the areas who could update on a monthly basis if they weren't things which are already being shown by the finance system. But I would say if you can't measure it easily, it's never going to be a good choice, even if you want to measure it easily. I'd pick something else until you can get that measurement done, if I'm really honest, because otherwise it becomes a bit, if you've just got gaps every month, people are like, well, is it really that important? Because the other thing, and I think Captain Nortimer said this, if you start measuring it, people do it. So behaviours change. I think one of their philosophies was along the lines of, if we say this is what we want to do and this is what we're going to look at, it's actually a behaviour change tool in its own right.
Exactly.
Yeah. We really struggled, actually, Catherine. I'm just leaving a startup business, and our private equity company are very much real estate people, and they're not used to running operational organisations, and they wanted us to be measuring things, but because we didn't have any revenue, because we weren't yet out of the development of sites, we didn't have the headcount, we didn't have the engagement, we didn't have the finances. So it's really difficult to try and sort of account for and justify and measure what you are doing. It becomes quite subjective. But that will change dramatically as the business becomes operational and the headcount builds and customers come in and invoices get paid.
And it's also quite difficult probably knowing what your target should be, is it not, Gemma?
Yeah.
I mean, that's because they need to be achievable, clearly.
Yeah, really difficult.
But in that scenario, it's about baselining. It's knowing where you're starting from, isn't it? And then
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What about rollout and communication? Any tips, guidance, reflections on communicating this to the whole organisation?
I would say, and I have got a slide note somewhere, which is it kind of looks at that. It's that thing with any performance objective, is it should all be cascading from the top anyway. So in reality, every one of these measures in my people and society areas are in my team's objective, full stop. So the rollout kind of is within that cascade down from purpose onwards. Now I know it's really easy for me to say that because it's not actually reality in a lot of places, but I think that's probably why I'd stress that the strategy map is the key bit on this, because actually that's sometimes the hardest bit to get people to say, actually, what do you want to do? What are you trying to achieve? You can only achieve one thing. What is it? And what does that mean in reality? So I think sometimes visions and stuff can be a little bit nebulous or not clear in terms of what does that mean though, and how we're going to do it.
Yeah, and everyone has their own interpretation of that. And actually, going through this process is a good way to get alignment, really clear alignment.
So I've seen scorecards used very much internally for decision making, board meetings, all that kind of thing. But we've not in my organisation at least, and I don't think in Rathbones either, have seen it presented back to the business in that way. And I think that's the bit that sometimes is missing. Like I said, it draws everyone back to what are we trying to achieve, what is the strategy, what is our vision, and what progress are we making. I think, and that's why I was quite interested in joining this call today, is to see maybe how you go about presenting it to the business as part of a general update on the health of the organisation.
I think as well, where it does become linked into bonus and things like that, it's to present that back on a regular basis for people to understand, this is my role, this is what I need to do, this is, I can impact all of those bigger things in the way that I'm doing things. So I think if people kind of understand where they fit in on the journey, and every job is as important as each other's, and you only get anywhere as a team, then I think people engage better by understanding. And the transparency, I think I've seen these sorts of things written out in such complicated formats that people were so baffled by them that they meant nothing to anybody, and ultimately the CEO would make a decision and be able to jargonize everything in a way that he would do what he wanted regardless of what the blooming scorecard said. So I think if people understand it and it's really simple, you can get people on board much more easily.
And I think it was it's quite interesting with this, because you're absolutely right. The biggest challenge for us was getting the board to agree that everyone's bonus should be linked to it. But as soon as that's there, people love this. They could look at this, and if it's all green, they knew they're getting their 100% of their bit held back. And if not, it's how it might influence. So it worked so well. But it's a good point, actually. I'm kind of taking that a little bit for granted, but that was why it was probably really successful and really loved, actually.
Yeah.
Christine, did you have any thoughts, or sort of in terms of?
So years ago at Robert Dias, we put in a balanced scorecard, but again, it's a retailer, and it was, it's really neat in retail because it's nice and simple, and all the store managers had their own scorecards, and that was then cascaded down through the sort of store teams, and again, they could measure how well they were doing. So it was, but I've not seen it done in financial services. We've got KPIs, so I've been doing quite a lot of work on HR KPIs, and we've got other KPIs for other sort of areas, and that's why I was keen to join, because I was thinking I'd forgotten all about the balanced scorecard. That was like years and years ago. And actually, is there something that, are we missing a bit of a trick in terms of pulling it together, a bit like you were saying, Faye? So I think my thoughts are, but again, it was quite simple in retail, because you could put the bonuses, you could do it really quite easily. It's a bit more of a beast in with a different sort of operational team, but I'm just sort of mulling over how that could work.
And in terms of my experience, how I've used it is for me, the balanced scorecard sits above the KPIs. The KPIs are a subset of that should flow out of that, because within that you'll have I mean, like your example, Rebecca, within the sales team, you can break down some of those, right? We're going to drive after these 4 clients or this sector. So within that, you have the people who are directly associated with that. You can really target them from a KPI point of view. So I see it more as a cascade. It's just a chunked up from a KPI.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted, Catherine, did you want to ask Gemma about the rollout a bit more? Because Gemma, you were just talking briefly about the Pret and DHL, was it? Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, I did it. Blimey, DHL would have been sort of 20 years ago, but I think it's just sort of going over what I've already said. I think people need to understand. Compass were very good at this as well, actually, but I think it's clear communication, it's transparency, it's people understanding exactly where they fit, exactly what the consequences are. And I think in Compass, we linked it in with a big cultural change program as well. So really, and Pret did this particularly well. Pret liked having certain things in their culture. So if they wouldn't call people head office people, but if you worked in a head office role, you also had to do 2 days of you had a buddy shop, and you had to go and work in the kitchen twice a year. And the whole purpose of that was so that everybody understood the challenges of everybody's role within customer facing production, because of all the kitchens on site. And then you were their conduit to take feedback back into the office to say, they're really struggling with these things technically, these things are causing issues, the production standards are too difficult or too easy. And if you didn't do that, if you didn't do your 2 buddy days, you lost 20% of your bonus.
Wow.
So yeah, I think it's that kind of, if you can ingrain it culturally, and I think particularly with a startup where you've got the opportunity to build the culture into what you want it, and not all of the history and the baggage of past situations. I think there's a real opportunity to actually embed it really positively and really ingrained into the business. But I would sort of always just say, keep it as simple as possible, make sure that people understand it, cascade it monthly, and people know about it. There's no surprises. I think that's the worst way I've seen any of these things, is where people don't understand them. They're heavily jargonized. You go in and ask one depot where's their balance scorecard, and half the people don't know because it's not being cascaded properly. And it's hard in bigger businesses, but like Compass Group, we used to have a full communications cascade calendar, and you couldn't communicate with the units outside of that calendar because it was such a vast organization that you just bombard managers with stuff that they couldn't deal with. That's really extreme. But it made the managers' roles a lot easier because they weren't being bombarded. And if you have a good manager, you always have that manager who ends up with everybody's troubles on their plate.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But I think it's if there's an opportunity with a startup to link it in with all of the values and behaviours and things like that, it's a great platform to be able to think about how you actually build the culture of the organisation from the very outset. Because if you want transparency, then it becomes so easy if you get it right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And if you get all the key stakeholders involved, so that at least they feel they've had their input rather than it being done to them, because I think otherwise it's quite difficult for that, because they're out supporting it. Certainly that's what we found when we were sort of developing it, by taking the store managers on the journey of the development as we were developing it. It was much better, the take up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting.
That's a key point, because that's about the alignment as well. It's like vent around what they think is right, and over time they all get to the same place, hopefully.
Rebecca, thank you ever so much for doing this. It's really interesting, and I think it's really thorough. The slides were great, actually, and really appreciate
thank you. Pleasure.
Really good.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Rebecca.
Thank you.
I'll draw it formally to a close, but I'll stay on just in case anyone has further questions. But I realise that because we've gone over slightly, sorry, you might have other places to get to. But really lovely to see you all. Rebecca, thank you again.
Yeah,
And
no,
Thank you.
It's good. It's always
Thank
good
you.
actually, some of these
Yeah.
things, isn't it, to
That's
just share that little bit. But it is a great tool. I do love it. And if you I think the building, Gemma's point about building a startup is absolutely brilliant, because this is so simple. Because what it also makes you do, so on employee engagement, a lot of people don't share them. But obviously, if you're sharing it every month, or we had a whole service, it was quarterly actually, it forces you to share all that, so you do just change behaviours and culture, even as a result of just having it, regardless of what the measures are, if that makes sense.
yeah, because it appeals to competitive behaviour, doesn't it?
It so does, yeah,
Does.
absolutely. Yeah, very much so. But no, lovely, thank you, my pleasure.
Brilliant, thank you.
Cool.